Act 1, Cold Open. It's September 1944. A German reconnaissance plane circles overhead. Below, in a muddy field near the Belgian border, a handful of American soldiers are inflating a rubber tank. Not a real one, a decoy. The canvas hisses as air fills the frame. They position it carelessly, just visible enough to be spotted from the sky. They leave it there, incomplete, as if they've abandoned it in haste. Then they move on. Within hours, German intelligence will report a massive American armored column massing in the sector. Within days, German high command will shift reserves to counter a threat that doesn't exist, and the men who created that phantom army will be long gone, setting up the next illusion somewhere else. Act 2. Context. By 1944, the war in Europe had become a chess game played at the speed of intelligence. The Allies were advancing, but German forces still held formidable positions. Every mile gained cost lives. Every deception that could buy time, redirect enemy reserves, or create confusion was worth its weight in ammunition. The U.S. Army knew this, so in January 1944, they activated a unit unlike any other, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Its mission was simple in concept, radical in execution. Lie to the enemy so convincingly that the enemy would believe the lie more than their own eyes. The men recruited for this unit came from places the Army didn't usually look: art schools, advertising agencies, photography studios, Pratt Institute, Cooper Union, the studios of New York. They were painters, illustrators, sound engineers, and graphic designers. Many had never fired a rifle. Some had never worn a uniform before, but they understood something that traditional soldiers didn't: how to manipulate perception, how to make the false look true, how to bend reality through image and sound and suggestion. Colonel Harry Reeves commanded them. By May 1944, roughly 1,100 of these men had been shipped to Europe, organized into 4 specialized components, each tasked with a different flavor of deception: inflatable tanks that could fool reconnaissance aircraft, wire-recorded sound that carried the rumble of armor across 15 miles of open ground, radio operators who could impersonate entire divisions, and soldiers who could walk into villages and whisper the right lie to the right person at the right moment. The Ghost Army was ready. Act 3. Rising Action. The first component was visual. The 603rd Camouflage Engineers had hundreds of inflatable rubber decoys: Sherman tanks, self-propelled guns, jeeps, trucks, aircraft, artillery pieces, all made of canvas and rubber, all weighing a fraction of the real thing. A full tank decoy could be set up in under an hour by a handful of men. The genius was in the imperfection. They didn't hide these fakes. They positioned them where German aerial reconnaissance could find them. They left them partially camouflaged, as if the Americans had been careless. They scattered them across fields in patterns that looked like a real unit in disarray. German pilots would photograph them. German intelligence would count them. And German high command would plan accordingly. Bill Blass, the fashion designer turned camouflage engineer, understood something fundamental about deception. The eye believes what it expects to see. A perfectly hidden tank is invisible. A sloppy tank is real.
The second component was audio. The 3132nd Signal Service Company Special operated a fleet of half-tracks equipped with 500-pound speakers and wire recorders, the predecessors of magnetic tape. They had pre-recorded sounds: the rumble of tank engines, the crunch of boots marching in formation, the clang of bridge construction, the distant boom of artillery. These recordings could be played across a battlefield and heard up to 15 miles away. A small team could simulate an entire division on the move. They could make a quiet sector sound like a staging ground for an invasion. They could make the enemy believe that reinforcements were arriving when nothing was there but sound and darkness. In the cold European nights, when visibility was poor and nerves were raw, sound became truth. The Germans didn't just see the Ghost Army, they heard it. The third component was radio. Morse operators with a gift for mimicry. Every radio operator has a unique fist, a distinctive pattern and rhythm in how they tap out Morse code. It's as individual as handwriting. The Ghost Army's radio operators studied the fists of real units, learned them, and then impersonated them. They would broadcast fake traffic, fake orders, fake unit positions. German signals intelligence would intercept these messages and report them up the chain of command. The Germans believed them because they came from the right frequency, in the right code, with the right rhythm. Ellsworth Kelly, the painter who would later become an abstract master, helped design the visual language of these deceptions. Every detail mattered. The fourth component was the most human. Small teams of soldiers would visit towns behind the lines, posing as members of real divisions. They'd sit in cafes, they'd drink in bars, they'd drop hints about where their unit was heading, what their strength was, what their orders were. They'd make sure spies and informants overheard them. Within hours, that misinformation would be passed up through German intelligence networks.
The enemy would act on rumors planted by men in uniform who looked just like any other American soldier. These were artists playing a role, and the stage was war itself. Act 4. Turning Point. And then came September 1944, Operation Bettenberg. Patton's Third Army was advancing rapidly through France, cutting through the countryside with a speed that left supply lines stretched thin and defensive positions fragile. There was a gap in the line, a sector where the American forces were thin, vulnerable, exposed. If the Germans realized how weak this position was, if they understood the true depth of the American presence, they could pour through and cut off the entire advance, unraveling weeks of momentum in a single counterattack. The Ghost Army was ordered to create the illusion of a full division holding that gap. Not a company, not a regiment. A division. Thousands of soldiers where only hundreds stood.
They moved into position under cover of darkness, their trucks carrying inflatable tanks that would catch the first light of dawn. They inflated their rubber armor, watching the shapes rise from the earth like a mechanical army materializing from nothing. They set up their speakers, positioning them to project sound across the landscape, across the hills and through the valleys, where German ears might be listening. They broadcast their fake radio traffic, voices calling out coordinates and unit designations, creating the acoustic signature of a massive force. They sent their men into towns to spread rumors, casual conversations in cafes, whispered intelligence passed to locals they knew would carry it to German lines. For days, they maintained the deception, rotating their broadcasts, moving their inflatable tanks to new positions, keeping the illusion alive and breathing. German reconnaissance reported a massive American force. German high command believed it. The reports came back consistent, detailed, alarming. German reserves that could have exploited the gap were held back, redirected to counter a phantom threat. The gap held. The advance continued. Later estimates suggested that this single deception operation may have saved 30,000 lives. Act 5. Consequences. Over the next 9 months, the Ghost Army conducted 22 deception operations. They moved across France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and into Germany itself, their inflatable tanks and wire-recorded sound preceding them like a phantom army made manifest. They fooled German intelligence again and again. Operation Viersen in March 1945 simulated the entire Ninth Army crossing the Rhine, a deception so complete that German commanders repositioned their forces based on phantom divisions that existed only in their minds. They made the enemy see what wasn't there. And then, in July 1945, the war ended. The Ghost Army was deactivated. The men went home. But their story didn't come home with them. It was classified, locked away. For over 50 years, the Ghost Army was a footnote that almost no one knew. The men who had served in it couldn't talk about it. They went back to their lives as if those 18 months had never happened. Bill Blass became one of the most celebrated fashion designers in America, his eye for line and form refined by the art of camouflage. Ellsworth Kelly became a master of abstract painting, his understanding of visual deception translated into pure geometry and color. Art Kane became a legendary photographer. They never spoke publicly about what they'd done in 1944 and 1945. The secret was kept so well that even military historians forgot it existed. It wasn't until 1985 that the Smithsonian Magazine published an article that cracked the seal. Slowly, the story began to emerge from the shadows. In 1996, it was officially declassified. In 2013, filmmaker Rick Beyer made a documentary for PBS called The Ghost Army. The story finally reached the public, but by then, most of the men who had served were gone. In February 2022, Congress awarded the Ghost Army the Congressional Gold Medal. Almost all of the veterans were dead. They received the honor they'd earned 78 years earlier, but most of them never knew it was coming. Act 6. Reflection.
The Ghost Army reminds us of something we often forget about war, that victory isn't always won by the loudest guns or the biggest armies. Sometimes it's won by the people who understand how the mind works, how perception shapes reality, how a well-placed lie can be more powerful than 1,000 bullets. These were artists, painters, designers, sound engineers, men who had spent their lives learning how to manipulate what people see and hear. The army took that skill and pointed it at an enemy, and it worked. The Ghost Army proved that imagination could be a weapon, that creativity could save lives, that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with steel, but with canvas and rubber and recorded sound. If forgotten battles and the men who fought them are your kind of history, there's always another story waiting in the margins.